I have a little bit of an advantage here because I've been communicating with somebody as a journalist who is with the Yemeni government's Ministry of Information, in the Ministry of Defense, their Department of Information. And I've talked to them about Yemen's role in the axis of resistance. And while they acknowledge that they are part of what is loosely called the axis of resistance, they take umbrage at any notion that they are controlled by Iran or influenced by Iran. In fact, he emphasized several times that the decision to intervene on behalf of Palestine, which is why Yemen is doing what it's doing, was a decision made by the Yemenis without consultation with anybody. They just said, this is what we're going to do. He did not deny that since that time, that Iran has provided assistance or Iran is in consultations to coordinate, but not control. The Yemeni are doing, or the Houthi are doing what the Houthi want to do, when the Houthi want to do it, how the Houthi want to do it. The Palestine 2 hypersonic missile is a indigenous system that makes use of Iranian components in the guidance and control and things of that nature. But the Yemeni, the Houthi, have a missile production facility. They're able to produce solid propellant. This isn't stuff you produce in your bathtub. It's the safety constraints and the quality control is, has to be top notch, especially if you're, producing a hypersonic missile. But they've done this. They've produced it. So we've seen the testing of it. So it's not as though this missile comes from Iran. It's a Houthi missile, and the Houthi are going to use it the way they want to use it. So the idea that there's an indirect approach to the Houthi, meaning you can go through Iran, you can put pressure on Iran, or you can put regional pressure, is absurd. And I think anybody who thinks that the Houthi are going to flinch in the face, I mean, what is this regional alliance going to do? Has anybody looked at a map and understand why, for instance, every time the Saudis try to punch in there, they get wiped out? You're entering the territory of the Houthi, you're extending your lines of communication, and you're creating plenty of opportunity for, being pinched off, stalled, isolated, killed. The Houthi have been fighting since 2014. This war is not new to them. And they haven't been defeated. And they've been, the Israeli aircraft have different pilots, maybe a couple different electronic components. But, the F-15 is the F-15, the F-16 is the F-16. And the bombs they drop are the same bombs. So, the Houthi aren't going to lose any sleep having Israeli aircraft or American aircraft or French aircraft come at them. And the fact that they continue to fire missiles every night shows that it continues to be a very difficult thing to strike what they call mobile relocatable targets or mobile missile launchers.
Scott, you're exactly right in terms of this idea that attempting to pressure Iran or pressure what are assumed to be Yemen's Ansar Allah's adversaries like Saudi Arabia and UAE could be folly. Even Foreign Policy magazine says Yemenis do not receive or expect, this is a knock on them, the Ansar Allah to provide services like food, medical care, or education. But after a decade of bombings from Saudi Arabia, they are dug in and can absorb intense attacks, while their importance and popularity have soared with each blow. Scott, help us understand, because in my estimation, what the Wall Street Journal said in the article I cited before, they said that in order to even get this regional coalition to work for Israel and for the United States, again, against Ansar Allah, they would have to make compromises with the Palestinians, essentially, and what probably is so, stop the genocide. So is Ansar Allah right now taking on the role, and maybe as a kind of a surprise role, of doing what the entire axis of resistance has been trying to do, which is stop this genocide and stop the war, and are now even getting people at very high levels of decision making and also narrative making thinking about this?
Well, I disagree with Ambassador Pincus, and I'll tell you why. Saudi Arabia has already initiated military strikes from their territory in the Houthi, including some land incursions. What compromises has Israel had to make to get Saudi Arabia to do that? The United Arab Emirates has continued to be involved in the south and looking to bring more troops in. What compromises that they have to make? I don't know where Pincus is coming from. I think, you know, the Saudis view the Houthi as a problem, and they've been willing to fight them. They don't need Israel to tell them to fight them. And the Saudis are smart enough to know that if you jump in on, you know, a situation where you have other powers doing the heavy lifting for you, you know, it reduces the amount of effort you have to exert, and that's what's happening here. What compromises? Has Saudi Arabia turned around and said, before we continue to fire artillery into Yemeni territory, we need you to stop the genocide? There hasn't even been that conversation. So I don't think the Houthi are, you know, this surprise element. I tragically think unless and it's not impossible, but unless the axis of resistance can revive itself in a different way, because it's going to be different kinds of pressure. But for instance, later this month, the ceasefire expires and Israel hasn't complied with it. Israel continues to occupy big chunks of southern Lebanon. And Hezbollah says that they will immediately begin resisting Israel's occupation. And even though Lebanon has a new president, General Aoun, the Christian, you know, he in the past has spoken about the need to defend Lebanese sovereignty. So I don't think there's going to be pushback from much of Lebanon against any effort by Hezbollah to kick Israel out of territory Israel's illegally occupying. That's going to put pressure on Israel. We don't know, you know, ultimately we don't know which way Iran's going to go. I have assessed, and I continue to believe that Iran is going to pick a path of, you know, negotiation with the West. But we can't pretend that, look, they just ran a major exercise, and the purpose of that exercise is to prepare them for war. And so there's a big element within Iran that not only is saying we must be prepared to defend ourselves, but if they, you know, if Israel and the United States continues to, you know, blow their horn, say we're going to attack, Iran may preempt that attack and strike first. And I think there's enough sentiment in Iran that if they feel like they're going to be attacked, then there's no sense in holding out for negotiations. You might as well get the first punch in first. So, and that would be devastating for Israel. So I think the Houthi are holding out to see what's going to happen. They are stubborn. They are morally committed to this fight. You have to give them that. They have linked, I mean, their terms are simple. Stop the genocide, get the humanitarian equipment in, and we stop doing what we're doing. And you got to admire them for that.
Scott, one of the most shocking parts about this is, as we watch Syria fall and as we watch that ceasefire that you just described come into place relatively around the same time period, there was, of course, a lot of pessimism about the axis of resistance. And then it seemed like immediately Ansarallah said, no, actually, we're just going to increase and escalate our moves against Israel to show what it seems like it's to show. I mean, they're effective strikes in a lot of ways. They're hitting, they say they're hitting their targets. Israelis in the thousands upon thousands are running to bomb shelters. And you have major media publications talking about how do you even address this problem. Scott, how is Ansarallah able to do this? I was reading up on the Palestine 2, and their hypersonic missile has the ability to hit Israel in 11 minutes. I think that's something like over 2,000 kilometers. How are they able to do this, given that Yemen, as you mentioned, has been decimated by endless war, Saudi Arabia, UAE, US, UK, bombing campaigns, military incursions, humanitarian catastrophe that rivals what we've seen in Gaza in terms of hunger and all kinds of other maladies. How are they able to do this?
Well, I think, first of all, Yemen remains one of the most least understood of the Gulf Arab countries. When I was involved with Iraq, there was a tendency amongst the ill-informed to denigrate Iraqis as, ignorant, camel jockeys, other slurs of that nature. But the Iraqis that I met were some of the most highly educated people in the world, people who received their advanced degrees in England and in Europe, in the United States. One of the guys that I interacted with was a nuclear physicist who got his PhD in the University of Michigan, and he just loved to sit down and talk about, the Wolverines. My point is they're very, very good. And we investigated at one point in time that the Iraqis that the Yemenis had provided the Iraqis with an SS-21 missile. The Iraqis had never received that from the Russians, and the Iraqis were looking at reverse engineering. And the Yemenis provided it, and the Yemenis brought over some people. And the Iraqis talked about the Yemenis as being highly proficient, very capable, professionals. And I think that sometimes that's what's missing here. The Yemeni are just as well educated. They have their scientists, their engineers are people who got their advanced degrees in the West. These are peer level professionals, but we don't give them that credit. That's why we ask the question, well, how can they do this? They're just a bunch of camel jockeys that have curved swords and sandals. How in God's name can they do this? Well, they can do it because they have some extraordinarily capable people. It's a big country with a lot of resources. I have to tell you that to make a solid rocket propellant production facility, it requires, look, both Egypt and Iraq had to bring in the Germans to do it. And both Egypt and Iraq have, scientists, advanced scientists and engineers, but they had to bring in a German company to actually make the facility. The Yemeni have done it on their own. And it just shows you that they are far more advanced than we, and far more sophisticated. Of course, yes, there's a tribal element to this. When you look at the fighters in the field, these are tribal fighters, et cetera. But the more you get away from the field and the more you get into the center of government, we're talking about some very sophisticated people with deep understanding of not only what their capabilities are, but what the problems they have are and what the solutions they want to achieve and how to achieve those solutions. And they've been doing this for a long time. I mean, they've been at war now for over a decade. That's all they know. That's every day, every morning they wake up, they're a nation at war, and it's the norm. And you don't survive 10 years at war unless you figure out how to do some things right. So the Yemeni are doing it right, and they're not going to be beat. It's going to be very difficult to inflict pain and suffering enough on them to get them to yield. I just don't see that happening. These, Israel bombed Lebanon, but Lebanon is not a homogeneous state. They bombed Lebanon. Initially, they bombed the southern Shia, and the rest of Lebanon was like, well, that's just the Shia and that's Hezbollah. But then when Israel turned up the heat and started bombing Sunnis and some Christian areas, now you saw everybody saying, hey, stop, Hezbollah, you got to stop doing what you're doing. There's no breaks like that in Yemeni in the social fabric, that you can't divide and conquer these people. When you bomb them, they all feel the bombing. It just makes them want to resist even more. Very, very tough people. And I just think we're wrong to pick the military solution. Israel could solve this problem immediately just by saying we're going to let humanitarian goods into, and Israel doesn't even have to concede any of the other things that they're doing. Simply just open up and let the humanitarian. But Israel's beyond doing the right thing right now. Israel's at the point where they are treating the Gazans as human animals, wild animals that have to be hunted down, exterminated. And if you're hunting down, exterminating wild animals, why would you bring in bags of dog food to feed them?
Yeah. And as you said, Ansar Allah, the Houthis, Yemenis in general, because they're very popular, especially in this key region, where essentially they control the Red Sea and they control the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and they control this whole coastal region, which Israel and the United States and the UK, they think they can bomb their way out of this, but it's not working, to say the least. And earlier I said over the last several years, the US and UK struck Yemen 700 times. Actually, that's just in the last year. So I need to correct myself on that. But yet they've only gotten stronger. Scott, talk about, because in my opinion, while Israel is, as you said, not stopping this genocide, they're not relinquishing. But at the same time, even with the reprieve that they've been extended through the fall of Syria, it seems like this long war, this war, what seems to be just this endless, forever war that has gotten itself in on all of these fronts, that seems to be expanding as well as it continues this onslaught. Earlier on this program, before the fall of Syria, we talked about Israel being militarily defeated. In many ways, I still see this because Yemen is able to pierce the Iron Dome. Israel is thinking really hard about Iran still, and we're going to talk a lot more about Iran today. Still thinking really hard. Oh, do we strike Yemen? Do we strike Iran? How can we actually defeat them? It seems to me that there's still a lot of trouble, and then you have Hezbollah waiting in the wings as this ceasefire is set to expire. What do you think about this position of Israel being militarily defeated? Because in many respects, it seems that while it's able to continue its onslaught and expand, it seems like into no person's land, like what it did in Syria, it's moving along these forever wars with no real seemingly achievable objectives in sight.
Well, again, we have to go back to the ceasefire that was signed or entered into in November that brought an end to the fighting in southern Lebanon, northern Israel. The Israelis are the ones that sued for the ceasefire, pushed for the ceasefire. Why? Because when they sent two of their best brigades, the 7th Armored Brigade and the Golani Brigade, into southern Lebanon, they got beat by Hezbollah on the ground. They were unable to achieve their objectives. They had to retreat under fire, and they took casualties. And right about that time, the Israeli command realized that our military is broken. You know, we've been fighting over a year, and we're just worn out morally, physically, materially. You know, our equipment hasn't been maintained properly, and the troops are just losing the will to fight. And that's why they opted for this ceasefire. They pushed for it. And Hezbollah accepted because Hezbollah is under a lot of pressure. I mean, even though the Israelis weren't doing so good on the ground, you know, they had inflicted some harm on Hezbollah through the air. The murder of Hassan Nasrallah, the decapitation of much of the leadership below him, the pagers that gutted the mid-level management of Hezbollah, and then some. Apparently, the Israelis had people on the inside of Hezbollah who were feeding back targeting information, and the Israelis were hitting some very valuable targets and doing harm. So, you know, Hezbollah didn't make the offer for the ceasefire, but when it was presented to them, they were placed under pressure by the Lebanese government to accept it. So Hezbollah did accept it, but Hezbollah wasn't defeated. That's the point we have to make. All Israel did is get a ceasefire, and then, you know, Assad fell, and so we have the perception of Israeli strength now because they're punching into basically an empty bag. They took over a significant part of the Syrian Golan Heights, but there was no resistance. They moved up along Mount Hermon, along the the border with Lebanon, to be 20 kilometers from, no resistance. They've moved into the south, no resistance. So it looks good on the map. You get a lot of flags flying, but there's no resistance. This isn't southern Lebanon where, you know, they tried to take certain villages and they were getting, you know, beat back. it's still a tired army. It's still an overextended army. It's still an army taking casualties in Gaza every day. Our headlines are dominated, to the extent that we cover Gaza anymore, are dominated by the murder, ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people, targeting hospitals, refugee camps, humanitarian convoys, and just women and children being killed by the score every day. That's happening, but at the same time, every day 1, 2, 3 Israeli soldiers killed, others wounded, a never ending. They're not at peace there. They may have leveled this entire place, but and if the latest reporting is accurate, Hezbollah has actually recruited like 12,000 fighters in the last several months.
I think it was Hamas, actually. I think you're talking about.
I'm sorry, you're right. Hamas had recruited.
Right. Yeah. Hezbollah is pretty big. Hezbollah is really big. But
no, I'm talking about Hamas. Hamas recruited, thousands, tens of thousands of fighters, and they may actually have more fighters today than they did when the conflict started. Level of training unknown, probably not as good. But hey, if you're supposed to be physically defeating your enemy, and your enemy's still resisting, killing people, and they're getting bigger, it sends a number of red flags. For instance, if you have a humanitarian disaster amongst the civilians, how is Hamas continuing to supply tens of thousands of fighters? Where is their supply chain coming from? I think Hamas has more resources and capabilities and are able to reconstitute. Sinwar was obviously in a difficult position near the end. They say he hadn't eaten for, I think, 4 days leading up to that. And, so, maybe they had a situational, reality in one localized area where Sinwar was. That's what drove him out of the tunnels to be fighting. But, Hamas has the ability to, first of all, the Israelis, they're like what we did in Vietnam. I mean, Gaza has in many ways become their Vietnam. Anybody who, if I say the Ashau Valley, how many times did we launch attacks across the Ashau Valley, to seize Hill 861 or, the Long Trang Byangpu line along the River Chi. I'm making all this stuff up. But, and then you achieve it, soldiers are dead, and then you fall back. And then the Viet Cong come right back in, the NVA come in, dig in, and next thing you know, you're launching the attack again. That's happening to the Israelis. They come in and they secure a place, but you can't stay there. They've blown everything up. There's nothing. So you run around, you do what you have to do, and then you leave, and Hamas comes right back, and you have to fight. And the Israelis are now fighting for the same terrain, for the 4th or 5th time. That's demoralizing the extreme. So the Israelis aren't in, and remember, their economy hasn't recovered. It's not as though the Israeli economy, the southern port of Eilat is still shut down because of the Houthi. So the idea that Israel wants to drag this thing out. Now you have some Israelis talking about, attacking Iran. It's conceivable that Israel would overextend itself and achieve the Palestinian victory for the Palestinians, meaning that the Israelis defeat themselves. I don't think Trump is going to let that happen. I think the Trump administration is going to try and bring about an end to the fighting, one way or the other. I don't know how they're going to do that. Hamas, they promised to, blow them to hell even more than they've already been blown. I don't know how that works, but look, there's some interesting politics going on between Trump and Netanyahu right now. The idea that the United States is going to rubber stamp Israel's wants and desires apparently isn't the case at all. And Trump, he showed a clip from, I guess, David Sachs being interviewed.
Jeffrey Sachs, I think. Jeffrey Sachs.
And he blames Israel, Netanyahu personally, for starting the Syrian conflict, the Iraq conflict, and wanting to get him involved. And this, Trump put this out. So Netanyahu now is not coming to the inauguration. There's some bad blood there. I think, that the Trump administration does believe that they're going to bring it into this war, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they back Israel 100%. They want this war brought to closure. I don't think they want to get involved in attacking Iran, because that would just take them to the opposite trajectory. I think they have some tough problems with the Houthi. And I think they'll be looking for some sort of compromise situation, maybe a resurrection of the wording of the Abrams Accord, which gives lip service to a Palestinian state without providing any roadmap. But the Israelis aren't as strong as they are making themselves out to be. I originally thought that Trump was going to come in because of the nature of his cabinet, and that Trump was just going to rubber stamp everything the Israelis want, and that would make them virtually unstoppable. But the tea leaves now seem to show that Trump wants to bring all this fighting to an end soon so that the United States can unplug, and that he doesn't trust Netanyahu, and therefore he's not going to do whatever Netanyahu he blames for getting the United States in wars. And he personally understands the lobbying power and prowess of Netanyahu. Why do you think we withdrew from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, back in 2018? Because Netanyahu personally lobbied Donald Trump. So I think he's fully aware of who Netanyahu is and what he is and how he does things. It's an interesting dynamic right now. We don't know. We have to wait 10 more days till he's sworn in to see what he's going to do. But in the meantime, the one thing that we can say is that there are things happening in Trump land that weren't on anybody's bingo card. And Trump alienated Netanyahu. Whose bingo card was that on? Who said, oh yeah, that's what's going to happen. So there's just some strange dynamics taking place right now that affect how you assess, the situation going forward. That's my intellectual get out of jail free card there. So I can say, well, I told you there were some strange dynamics at play, but there are. It does make doing predictive analysis difficult.
Yeah, surely it's hard to predict. I think what makes it so difficult, Scott, right now is we've been talking about all these dynamics surrounding West Asia, Israel's continued. It seems like it's trying to spread whatever tentacles it has, backed by the United States, just everywhere it can. It's trying to take all of Palestine. It's trying to fend off every single and what it claims is destroyed. I mean, it's warning, right? You had the UN ambassador warning Ansar Allah, we are going to give you the Hamas and Hezbollah treatment. Meanwhile, Hamas, for however Syria's loss is going to affect them, they are still fighting very hard. And that report that you cited about Hamas's numbers, in the article in Jerusalem Post, it literally says that the numbers that Israel is putting out there is essentially a 1-to-1 ratio, where the amount of Hamas fighters they supposedly have eliminated equal the number of Hamas fighters, or are less than the number of Hamas fighters that are left, which they think makes no sense. But what it seems like has happened is that, of course, resistance has grown in Gaza for obvious reasons. But with Trump, even, Trump 1.0, the first Trump administration, it was, it was an Israeli rubber stamp, right? But we are in a different situation. Israel is unhinged, out of control, and really at risk of creating huge problems. They're even talking about Turkey versus Israel. Oh, there was a panel. Maybe a war with Turkey is more valuable than a war with Iran right now. It's this kind of unhinged, what seems to me still desperation. They think that they're riding a wave, but it seems like it's almost like they're thinking they're on borrowed time or something. They've got to go now because this is the opportunity to cement and solidify their existence for good. But that's not going to work for the United States, because the United States wants to project power in the Middle East. It wants, obviously, to occupy and to have a presence and dominate it. But what the model that the United States has employed, that you know so well, Scott, has been these endless wars, which have actually backfired and done the opposite. Your thoughts?
See, I do believe that Trump is seeking to break the paradigm that currently exists in the Middle East. I don't think he's seeking to occupy and remain. He's indicated in the past and hinted at it today that he wants out of Syria, that he wants the American troops that are in Syria to be out of Syria. and I think he will, look to make a deal with the Kurds, with the Turks, with the, whatever we're calling the Syrian government, the Iranians, to bring an end to the fighting in the vicinity of, I guess it's northeastern Syria, so he can withdraw, and he wants out of Iraq as well, and so I don't see him just coming in and rubber stamping the same policies of the past. I actually think that Trump is looking to undertake some bold initiatives to bring an end to the fighting, and some of these bold initiatives may not be what the Israelis would prefer. But again, I mean, Trump also could take advantage. If the Israelis are willing or indicate that their number one priority now should be to prepare for the return of the Turks of Ottoman Empire, and that it's more important to prepare for that than it is for the Iran project, which they've been undergoing now for decades, trying to bring down the theocracy. You could be in a situation where the Israeli inclination is towards a negotiated resolution of the Iranian issue to keep the Iranian government that's there today in play, because then to play them off against the Turks and to use, make the Iranians sort of a de facto ally in the containment of a new Ottoman Empire. So there's just a lot of interesting dynamics taking place today that that make it. I don't think that we can fall back on whatever models that existed prior to during the Biden administration, the diplomatic model, et cetera. I think Trump wants to come in and just throw all that away and start all over to get America out of there. I don't see Trump wanting to maintain this occupation of the Middle East. I think he's looking to be totally withdrawn from the region to the largest extent possible, so that the United States can stop trying to lead with the military and start leading economically. He wants to get in a economic competition with the Chinese, not a military competition.